Missouri Governor Mike Parson announced he's joining more than a dozen other Republican governors for what they're calling a security briefing at the U.S.-Mexico border. Missouri Capitol Bureau Chief Joe McLean is in Jefferson City with more.
Children dying from fentanyl is 100% preventable. And while President Biden and the federal government fail to do their jobs by securing our southern border, Missouri will act.
Governor Mike Parson and other Missouri Republicans have blamed the Biden administration's immigration policy for a rise in fentanyl exposure and death.
They're forcing these migrants to carry fentanyl across the border.
Fentanyl and its variants led to just over 70,600 deaths in 2021. But Republicans are incorrect on the source of this drug. The U.S. Sentencing Commission says 86% of convicted fentanyl traffickers were U.S. citizens. Also, Customs and Border Protection say 9 out of 10 fentanyl seizures that happen at the southern border occur at legal crossing points or vehicle checkpoints, not illegal routes. President Biden has said he'll be able to better manage the amount of entries if Congress makes a change to the U.S. asylum law. But a bipartisan deal, which would allow the federal government to cap the number of migrant entries and end the catch and release policy, is being opposed by former President Donald Trump and his followers. When asked if the deal is dead in a recent Fox News interview, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley said,
"If it's not dead yet, it should be dead. I mean, there is absolutely no reason to agree to policies that will just further enable Joe Biden."
Missouri Democrats accusing Republicans of deliberately stalling a solution on the border to use the issue to help their re-election chances.
Just because Donald Trump wants to run on immigration, the Republican Party wants to run on immigration in the next election, they have to blow it up because the Supreme Leader said so.
Hawley and other Republicans have denied that accusation. In Jefferson City, Joe McLean, WGEM News.